My name is Rico. I'm a colleague of the presenter, Chris Whong. He and I both work at a company called Query, which will come up a little bit over the course of the conversation, so disclosure that we work there. I'll let Chris introduce the scope of today's presentation, the project that inspired it.
Basically, as Rico said, we're going to talk about this project, which has been an ongoing, not terribly focused effort to build a spatial data set of New York City Capital Projects. So I'm going to give an overview of the capital budget because it's pretty complex, all the different nomenclature and abbreviations and names of different things and the cycle that it comes out on. A look at existing information and resources available for the capital budget. We're going to look at our crowd geocoding effort, which we've been running since November, but it's stalled a little bit lately, except for tonight, where we're going to kick it back off, and you all will actually get an opportunity to geocode a few projects if you so desire. So after the presentation, we're actually going to divide and conquer, and you'll be able to take a small list of 5 projects and see if you can help look them up. And that'll actually end up right in the data set, which will be pretty cool. So before I go further, I'll show this map. Basically, this is the downstream product of what we've got so far. And you'll see in the little information window on the left, this is showing about 2010 projects out of a data set that has about 5,000. So it's definitely not complete, but it is close to complete for a small subset of the data, which is all what we're calling local projects. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. But each of these circles represents one row in the data set of capital projects that are currently ongoing in New York City. And if you hover over them, RC of Jesse Owens. Okay, this is a playground that costs $7.5 million. This one is a cultural arts center that costs $7.8 million. This is heating and cooling replacement. So lots of different capital projects going on throughout the city. So NYC's capital budget provides funding for construction and rehab of infrastructure such as schools, roads, libraries, and parks. Projects must have either a value of $35,000 and a period of usefulness of at least 5 years.
Yeah, earlier in the day when we were talking about this, Chris, you had said it was an and.
Yes, I think that's correct. And then capital budget is funded by proceeds from these various different sources. So this is all on this FAQ page. So I'm definitely no expert on capital budget. This is just kind of something I've studied over the years, and I also worked on it in some semi-official capacity while I was working at the Department of City Planning on the capital budget team a few years ago. So very interested in where these things happen and how much we spend on them. And we're just scratching the surface of what's possible if we can generate a good spatial data set of these projects. So just so you can get a rough idea of what we're talking about here, this fiscal year's capital budget is about $11.8 billion. So it fluctuates over time, but every year they do a preliminary and then they do, I think, a couple of rounds of that. And then there's finally the approved budget. Just some nomenclature that you might see inside of capital budget. What you would consider a project is at the bottom of the list. And the capital budget itself, the official document that comes out, the Office of Management and Budget, has project types. So that's the top level. So these are like 2-letter codes, describe very top level of project. So LB means Brooklyn Public Library in the examples I'm citing here. Then there are things called budget lines. So basically the capital budget shows project types and budget lines. And here's a couple examples where these are almost identical, but one is for construction, reconstruction, rehab, improvements, site acquisition, et cetera, for branch libraries in Brooklyn. And the other one is the exact same thing, except that it's council funding, whatever that exactly means. But at the bottom of the hierarchy is projects. And what's important to know about projects is that it can be funded by multiple budget lines, not just one. So you may find a project that actually is pulling money from 2 buckets, which is what the budget lines are. So when you actually go to the website to download the capital budget, and I'll show you the website very quickly, but this is a New York City government site. Inside here under June 2020 adopted budget, you will see a thing, if you scroll down, that says capital budget. This will download a many 100-page PDF, and it looks like this. So this is one little page, but it looks like a screen dump from a computer system. And each one of these sections is a budget line. So there's a budget line with an ID. So this is HB 1027, for example. So HB stands for Highways and Bridges. So that's like the top level project type. And then this one is for reconstruction of the Harlem River Drive Viaduct from East 127th Street to 2nd Avenue, Manhattan. So that sounds like a project, but it's also a budget line. So maybe there's several projects underneath that. So that's a lot to go over and gives you these kind of big high level numbers, but most of these are buckets of money. They're not terribly specific about what they're actually going to spend it on. So then there's another thing called the Capital Commitment Plan, which is released 4 times a year and includes the actual project level details. So this looks like another set of screen dumps from a computer system. And inside here, we've circled one project. But I think the caveat here is that this is one project and only the elements of that project that are funded by a specific budget line. So if a project line shows up, if a project is funded by 2, it'll actually show up twice in this document. And this document's 4,000 pages long and is actually so large that it's published in 4 sections. So I'm going to go back to this website just to show very quickly that if we scroll down to Capital Commitment Plan, and click on it, you will see that it's actually published in 4 volumes because it's so big. So each one of these is a PDF. So if you wanted to search for a project, you'd have to download all 4 of these, open them up, and Command F or Control F. And I think some people who work in government do this from time to time in order to find details about a project. So that's how things had been for the last little while. And when I left city government, this was all we had to work with versus anything else we could beg, borrow, and steal from other agencies or negotiate getting our hands on. But this is the only official public record of how we spend our capital money that's official and detailed enough. But in the last few years, another publication that's come out called Capital Project Detail Data, which is wonderful. This is kind of another set of PDFs on top of the original ones, but these are divided by borough instead of just being 4 chunks that are released in order. Basically, they've made a nicer presentation for this information. So we have 1 page for each project. So here's the same one that was listed here in this screen dump that was kind of a little hard to read for Carroll Gardens HVAC replacement is now shown here. So this is the same project. You can see project ID has a nice little alphanumeric code, LBM 13CGHC. But this has lots of goodies in it and it's much better formatted. So we can see the 2 budget lines that fund this. So here are the 2 budget lines. We can see the original budget, and this is in thousands. So this is a $1.1 million project. Then we can see what's been spent already and what's planned. So for this original budget of 1.1 million, we've already spent 1 million, and we're planning in fiscal year 22 to spend another 3 million. I don't know much about the details of this project, but the total, if you combine what has already been spent with what is planned to be spent, is about $4 million, which is very much different than the original budget. So I won't opine on why that is, but those 2 numbers are very different. So we should maybe check that out. So this is great. And when I discovered this last fall, I was like, we've got to have this data. So we ended up scraping it, which is wonderful. And it also has this community board served field. And I think there's actually, at least in the ones that were published last fall, a big typo or big error in them where I think they reversed Bronx and Brooklyn because this is supposed to be 306 instead of 206, but we fixed that in our data. So we end up scraping it, even though there is a data set available on New York City Open Data for this now. And actually revisiting it a few months later, it actually looks like they've improved that data set because first time we looked at it last fall, it actually didn't have a lot of the fields that were contained in the PDF. So as part of revisiting it before this presentation, I realized that they have improved the data set. So I'm going to show at this point what it looks like. So this is capital project detail data $, which is on the New York City Open Data Portal. And just so you can see, each one of these is a capital project, and you can see the project IDs here. You can see this is the community boards field, which I think is called community board, and you can scroll all the way across, and here's all those numbers for what was actually spent, this is the original budget amount, etc. We also have our version of it, which is on query.cloud, which is what we scraped. Someday I would love to compare these two and see if they actually jive, which they should, because they're in theory pulling from the same source, but you can use either one of them at this point, and I would love to combine the efforts at some point and just check and see if the city's official one is worth using at this point. It seems like it is, which is exciting. So getting the data, basically this is a little table that if you group everything by its borough and then sum the combined total and the prior actuals and the planned spending, this is what you end up with. So 36 billion of already spent plus planned spending for citywide projects. And then the rest of them fall into a borough. So that's an important distinction because they actually do distinguish between what is considered a citywide project, which I guess means it would have citywide benefits versus borough benefits. Then there's this concept of local. So there is a community board served field and it's not filled out for everything. So there are some projects that are assigned to the borough of Brooklyn or the borough of the Bronx, but do not have community boards listed, which we would consider borough-wide. So the ones that do have community boards listed may have 1 or more. And that's basically saying these communities will benefit at least directly from this project. In Brooklyn, for example, many of the ones that are in Prospect Park list all of the community boards that are surrounding Prospect Park. So I haven't done a whole lot of research into how accurate that is, but at least it's there and it's something to work with. So this is just a quick breakdown of what we're calling local versus borough-wide for all the non-city projects in the data set. So you can see the spread is a little bit different across the different boroughs in terms of actual funding amounts. So on top of that, because we have this community board served field, we were able to do some simple mapping. So we don't have like discrete geometries for these things yet, but using those fields, we know where community boards are or community districts are, so we can actually combine them and do some aggregations. This was just taking the 10-year capital plan category for each one of these projects and just grouping or aggregating the total spend by community district. It yields these little small multiples maps, we call these. So each one of these shows a different category and where the spending for that category is listed as happening, or at least listed as supporting in the data set. There's actually a much longer version of this that has many more of these. So this is just kind of the top chunk of it that would fit on a slide. But I encourage you to go check out the blog post that we wrote on this last fall. And you'll notice that things like this one, which says neighborhood parks and playgrounds, it has coverage all over the city because those are everywhere. And then there's some that are much more specific to some other kind of work that are only happening in a few places or one place, which is mildly interesting, but I would encourage you to go check it out. Each one of these could be its own little research project because there's so much going on here, but interesting way to check out the data. So moving on, we want to go below community district level. And the old saying is everything happens somewhere. The task at hand is assigning geometries to these projects. Interestingly, this is not the first time that this has been approached. And I've seen Councilmember Brad Lander, for example, actually has a web map of capital projects on his website. And that's the work of his staffers or somebody in his office that's actually pulled out all of the projects that are relevant to his district, geocoded them, added additional information, and made like a nice web interface for them, which is wonderful, but it doesn't apply to the whole city. There were efforts while I was in city government to do the same thing, but they never really saw the light of day, which is why we have to do this again on the outside as a community project. There's a lot of different efforts to try and figure out how we can add a spatial component to these capital projects. Can we assign point geometries to them? Well, we can try. So there's 5,000 of these things, but if I just look at the local projects, so the ones that list, for example, Community District 6 in Brooklyn, which is where I live, I would say it ends up being just a few dozen. So it's not that bad. I can sit down for an hour and a half and actually read the project descriptions and try and locate each one of these things. So this map comes with a huge asterisk because a lot of these are sewer projects that cover very large swaths of space, but with the caveat that we just want to have some notion of where it's happening with single point geometry. This is the best effort of doing that and gives you this very interesting picture of where the big ones are, where the little ones are. And you can see there's things here like William Penn Playground renovation, $800,000. There's things that are in the middle like Red Hook ball fields, $15 million for a ball field project. There's the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal, $3.5 million. Then there's big ones like this one, which I believe is a sewer or some kind of water project, which is reconstruction of Columbia Street area. Phase 2. So lots of codes in here, lots of little interesting tidbits, lots of interesting stuff in Prospect Park, like reconstruction of the carousel, reconstruction of the picnic house, things like that. All these Prospect Park ones also listed Brooklyn CD6, but they also listed probably all the surrounding districts as well. So we have a little bit of overlap between districts that may show up here.
And were these manually annotated was Jim's question.
No, sorry, it depends on what you mean by annotated. These were manually geocoded, so I just had to choose what I thought was the best point to place the marker. But the actual text that you see on the screen here is pulled straight from the data set. So it's what's officially in those PDFs as a project description.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, great. Now do the whole city. Okay, so we have 5,000 of these projects. I'm gonna need some help. So if you know me, I'm on Twitter a lot, but this is me saying, hey, I need volunteers to manually look at projects to add lat-long coordinates. Pretty straightforward. If interested, I'll assign you a community district, and each has several dozen, should take a couple of hours. Who wants to help? So I just kind of fired this off and said, it'd be neat if a few people jump in and help me out with this. I don't really know how I'll manage it, but I'll figure it out. And people started responding and saying, hey, I'll do it. And this person, Dante Lee, I love his Twitter name, This Guy Maps. He jumped in, and I think he did more than one, actually. Basically, people were just excited, and they were like, hey, I finished up this district that you assigned me. And I'll be like, okay, you want to do one more? And they're like, sure. So a bunch of people were repeat helpers that did a lot of these. And basically, we've gotten up to about 2,000 now, which is very close to complete of just the local projects. So keeping things organized, we use an Airtable. Basically, I create a view on the sidebar. So BK01, BK02, BK03. I would give someone a community district, and then they can click on this and have just their list of projects that they're responsible for. And then all they have to do here is go in and look at the scope summary and look at the description, see if they can find it on Google Maps, and then drop a lat long in here. So we're good to go.
Was all this mapped in ArcGIS? How did you map the sewer lines against funding, especially since they may run across so many different areas? And I think you might have covered this.
Yeah, it's not that sophisticated. So I think it's much more just trying to find the general area. I glossed over a big chunk where we did programmatically geocode a bunch of these. There's an existing data set for some capital projects that is published by Do It. It's on a web map. And I pulled those down and got centroids for those. And that was, I think, a few hundred projects that were just kind of bulk geocoded that way. But most of these were done by the community. So by our powers combined, so what we're doing here is on the right, which is this lookup table. So it's geometries for each project provided by volunteers. And then we join by project ID to the official data. Those two things together make a spatial data set. It's obviously not perfect and it's obviously not complete, but we've made a lot of headway and we're trending towards a complete data set. So Airtable is a place where anybody who I give a link to that can edit, they're kind of on the honor system to go in and like do only the section that I assign them to, but it's changing all the time. So we have this situation where we don't really know who changed what when, and it could be total chaos. So every now and then, I will actually archive it in query. This is what our company does, is have this data platform that also is a version control system. So by running a little script locally on my machine, I can pull down the data set as it exists at any given moment on Airtable with a little node script, and then make a commit of that data set to a query data set, and then push that up to Query Cloud. So I just run that command whenever I need to, and that gives me a new sort of snapshot of that data that is also published so people can download it. If you go to query.cloud and you see this Capital Projects data set, you can actually see when that commit was made and when it was updated, and trust it a little bit more because you know exactly what happened, and you can see the version history, which is wonderful. So we're using our own product for this, which is great. Airtable as my editor and Query as my archival site where I can store the data and trust that it won't be moved around or modified because it's an immutable version. So what's great is that now that I've shown you that we have this script that runs somewhere else, it's a good time to introduce where we're headed at Query with dataset automation. So this is a slide that shows our dream of datasets that update themselves. And what that really means is that there's a script that doesn't live somewhere else and run somewhere else, but actually lives with the dataset. And I mean that in a true sense that it's actually versioned along with the data. If the data changes or the script changes, it becomes a new version. Basically what that means is you can have datasets that can reach out on a schedule or on command and pull down source data to make a new version of themselves. And that's the way we've structured things at Query. In addition to that, data sets can be based on another data set. So as long as the source is in Query, it becomes very easy to say, anytime this bulk data set is updated, these ones are all listening for that event and can pull down the bulk data to update themselves. So what that would look like for this particular project is that we pull down data from Airtable into this FY 2021 Capital Projects detailed data set. And then there's 3 different users that want to consume that bulk data. This person may want to join it with neighborhoods. This person may want to filter it for Brooklyn, and this person may want to join it with demographic data. So each one of those processes in the normal data analysis world would have happened inside of a Jupyter notebook or in a script somewhere running on their machine. So what we're trying to do is elevate these common data practices to a place where they can be shared, trusted, and archived. Those derivative data sets may be useful to other people as well. So that's kind of the world we want to live in. You may have heard of us refer to this as the data commons in previous presentations, but that's where we're headed.
I also wonder if there's a way to see which projects use participatory budget process. So you could imagine someone adapting the data set and either adding a column to tag that. And then a second question, is there a way of telling if a project is completed? I look at local projects on a map and know where some are finished in X year or X fiscal year, some in process and others not yet started. I know this firsthand, but cannot tell if I only look at the info on your map. Maybe add something to that, like time period.
I think a big thing to know is that projects come in and projects fall off. As far as I know, anyway, anything that's in there now is planned to happen or is ongoing. And when it ends, like when it gets finished, it actually disappears, which means to really get a good picture of what's happened when over the long time span that you have to be looking at. And wherever you start looking, there's still going to be projects that began prior to that date. So it's a much bigger task. So really, like, that's a huge asterisk too, that everything that's on this map is what existed in the data set last fall. It's already changing this year. Every time the new budget comes out, there will be brand new projects, and there will be some projects that probably disappear. Even if we were to complete this current iteration of geocoding projects, there's going to be a handful more that come into existence next year that we have to continue this work. So you're never done. Or as they say, like, software is done like the dishes are done. Data sets are also done like the dishes are done, which means you'll be doing them again very soon.
Are you pairing projects to specific bonds in light of being tied to specific financial investment?
No, not that I'm aware of. The only thing that's in the data set is city funding versus non-city funding. So I think that's as good as it gets unless somebody has more detailed information sources for each of these. I think there are ways to find out more details about where the money's coming from. And I think in general, there's a lot of other things we could attach to these, like news articles, pictures, which would be wonderful. Like, people can just go out and take pictures of these capital projects. So that's another eventual goal of this website, if anyone's interested in it. Yeah, my vision for this website is that it become the source of all this information coming together. Whatever people can contribute is, I would love to be able to click on this, the carousel and Prospect Park project, and be able to see link to the contract, star rating for the contractor, a bunch of local news articles about how people are enjoying it or how they're inconvenienced by the construction or whatever it is. All of these things have different footprints around the community, and there's lots of information artifacts that we could put together for each one of these things. So this map is open source, so if you want to help out, it's on GitHub. We basically rebuild it, so it's a static site. There's no backend to it. Every time we update that query data set, I can just go to the website that's hosting this and just say rebuild, and it'll just go grab the latest from query and then put the website together. So we actually do that at the end of this session once we've added some new projects. So to give you an idea of where we're at, this is kind of cool because we started with like the handful that I geocoded personally back in like November. So we had 60 or 80 or something done at that point. After a bunch of people helped out on Twitter and just volunteered, we were able to get up to about 2010. So we've actually mapped 91% of the projects that have local reach because they have a community board mentioned, which is 39% of the entire data set, which is pretty awesome. So I think the next goal, I need to go through and actually figure out why we only have 91% when we've in theory touched every community board. And I think there's just a lot of projects that just can't be geocoded for whatever reason, because they're for things like vehicles or they're for things like computer systems and things like that. And then I think the next step is to actually do the borough-wide ones, because many of those can be mapped to a discrete location. We just need to make sure we're clear that considered borough-wide and not local impact, but they should still be mapped. So I think that's where we're going to start next.
Is the data verified in any way once it's geocoded?
No, that's another big caveat. I think we have a lessons learned slide at the end of this that would actually list that, but yeah. QA/QC is a problem. There's no real verification. So I think what I would love to be able to do is have the website be a place where you can just flag something and it'll just go into another Airtable somewhere. Somebody said that this isn't right, or maybe you can leave a comment for it. It's come up where somebody forgot to put a negative on their longitude, and it ends up, if you draw a line of latitude eastward to the opposite longitude, you end up in Uzbekistan. So we had a couple point geometries in Uzbekistan for a while until those got fixed. But yeah, I know some of these are in the wrong place. I've already heard complaints, some of them, especially like the sewer projects, but I think it's a best effort and we have to come up with some kind of plan for feedback on this. And actually in the meantime, the issue queue on Query Cloud is actually a great place to start. So you can leave a message there just like you would on GitHub, and we can use that as a place to track those kinds of issues.
Since you're contributing back, the question asks, are your contributions linked to your GitHub profile, i.e. being able to see what other data sets a person has contributed to? So you kind of just touched off this, but I thought it'd be worth explicitly asking that question.
No, I mean, at this point, the contribution is just literally writing lines in an Airtable. So best I can do is actually add your name to the README on Query Cloud, which I've done for those who have participated so far. Not as fine-grained as that. It's something we'd love to build in Query, where you could contribute one row to something and have it be associated with your identity, but that's not something we have in place at this point.
And then in the spirit of, data sets that evolve and generate new versions as people contribute to them or as they change over time, one of the questions is, are you trying to save the data points that have been removed from the original data set because they've been canceled or completed?
So I haven't gotten that far yet, but I would say yes. If this thing survives into the next budget cycle, absolutely. There's no reason, because we're basically building a lookup table of geometries, so it doesn't really concern itself with the official list of current projects. So yeah, there's no reason to ever remove a geometry from the lookup table or from the table of geometries, because even when that project is finished, I think that geometry is still relevant to know where it happened. So the work would have to be in creating some broader data set of all projects that have ever existed versus the ones that are currently in the budget and ongoing. So what I'm going to do right now is say node Airtable sync.js, and what you will see before your eyes is going to hit Airtable's API, pull down the data. Here we go, live demo. There we go. Now saved it to a file on my computer. It did a commit to a query dataset called NYC Capital Project Detailed Data Geom, and then it pushed it to Query Cloud. And let's go check it out on query.cloud. And you will see, this is Capital Project Detailed Data. Let's go to see the Geom data, this guy right here. And it says pushed a minute ago, which actually should say less than a minute ago, but I think that's as low as it goes. And we have 26 versions of this data set. So if you click on the history tab here, you'll see that this is the one we just did tonight. And then 8 hours ago, there was another one where I updated the README. I guess there was a big gap from about 2 months ago. So your contributions, if you made some tonight, are now versioned in this data set, which is wonderful. And I can actually go to Netlify and I'm going to redeploy the website. And while I'm doing that, actually, I would love to hear if anyone had any very interesting things they discovered. I would love to share with the group.
Relatedly, I actually skipped over a question that was asked near the top to you, Chris, which is, was there anything that surprised you in this map that you found or that you learned throughout the process?
I think just the sheer amounts on things, like $15 million ballpark renovations. Like I know things cost money, but like some of them are just very shocking. And you just look at like, oh, security camera upgrade for a housing project can be millions of dollars. And there's also tons of just different like IT related things that are just extremely expensive. I would say that's probably just trying to understand. Each one of these raises so many more questions, I guess, when you start looking at it and then you start Googling and you start finding like information. I will also say that there's a capital project going on my street right now where they're lining the sewer with concrete. So capital projects came to my front door, to my street at least. And it was kind of neat to find that in the data set. It's a citywide project to do sewer renovations. But that was like kind of neat to see it out front. I'm trying to remember how I actually connected what they were doing to a project ID. And I think they found a document with the company name on it after talking to the workers, shared it with my block email group. And then inside that document was a project ID. And I was like, oh, that's in the data. That's so cool. So yeah, that's one story. Okay, so it's actually redeploying right now and it takes about 5 minutes sometimes. So that'll run. If no one else has anything to share, I actually wanted Brendan a chance to show off a derivative work that he's worked on, show the downstream value of this data set that you can use it to aggregate and do other things.
Mind if I take the baton for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Thanks so much. And Chris, this is great. And we just wanted to quickly cover what we talked about a little bit with this idea of having data sets that are derived from this. So tonight we want to show how when you do work like this and really sort of work hard to manually hand geocode something, we really want to get into a system where the contribution you made can go ideally even farther. And so by using this sort of downstream data set, I'm going to play the role of this spatial join with neighborhoods downstream data set and quickly show when Chris pushed that new version to Query Cloud, I have a script that is dependent on that script and knew that, oh, cool, Chris had that thing and it automatically ran. And we had a new data set that updated a few seconds ago that is my work, which is taking all of the geocoding that everybody just did and re-aggregating it for zip codes within New York City. The nice thing here is anytime that source data set updates, we get this other one here. And you can download this for free right now. So if while you were thinking about this, you're like, oh, it'd be cool to see this by zip code. A, congratulations for having the exact same thought as me. But also B, you can have that same data set as a result of your contribution tonight. We went from 1900 to 2005 projects that match the zip code within New York City. And some of the things that are exciting about this data set is it takes the geocoded set and combines it with the number of residents in each zip code. And so you can start to get closer to analysis of how many people are being served by a budget. With every asterisk under the sun, we wouldn't in any way call this conclusive, A, because we haven't had a chance to vet the original data set, and the data set isn't yet complete. But as we increase the completion of this, it gets more and more interesting. And just to sort of show what that looks like, you can actually take that entire thing and taking the liberty of putting it on a map. And now you can see each zip code and the size of each bubble is determined by the total combined budget for that zip code. If you go into the actual data set, the combined budget combines both our city contributed funds and externally agreed upon funds. I'm not totally confident in this number yet, but we do have the budget per resident calculated, which is basically just the population of that zip code from the 2015 census combined with the total, or that divided by the overall budget line. So I think that's really what we wanted to show. If you want to peek under the hood of how we're building this, I just wanted to quickly preview what that looks like. I apologize for showing you code on screen if you're not a programmer. The whole idea is if you don't program, you don't have to look at this, you can just download the data. But this is what we mean when we say declaring data set dependencies and having data sets that are sort of built on top of each other. And so what you're looking at is a tool that we'll be sort of putting out, and then we're actively beta testing on our own Discord. This is an open source project that you can run locally as well. And here I'm actually importing the BetaNYC's population from 2015, which is a data set that I made to do the neighborhood populations and zip codes. And then the geom data set that everybody is working on. And then there's a whole bunch of GAC that we won't go into, but this is all the magic and all of the code that makes that data set exist. And this is tied to the data set itself. So if you download this data set in this form, it'll give you a zip file and the code for this is included in that. So that gives you two things that are helpful. One, you can rerun that code if you want to get the updates yourself. But more importantly, you can audit my work. And you can say, hey, is that actually accurate? And you can sort of find some hidden gems. This data set is heavily reliant upon BetaNYC's fantastic zip code geometries, which is a wonderful data set presented as GeoJSON. It's just like it's open data all the way down in this presentation. But yeah, we just wanted to show that off. If you want to download this data, again, it's a work in progress. You can also have that for free with an account on Query. That was my only plug. Over to you, Chris.
Awesome, thanks. So I'm going to present last slide. So basically, like lessons learned. Outreach and community management are hard. This is not a core function of Query, but it's definitely something that we're interested in. So we want to support it. But if this is going to become more substantial, if we can get the data set more complete, then we shift over to like making the website more complete, where we can start adding in the things people have been sharing in the chat, where like there's tons of resources about these capital projects that are not officially in data sets, that are in PDFs and other websites about bidding for contracts and things like that. So compiling all that would be a wonderful thing to crowdsource. Keeping things fresh takes work because the underlying data from the city actually comes out 3 times a year. So yeah, you need to kind of keep things fresh and like you keep projects in that may fall off, but we should still keep a record of them to know what was happening in prior budget cycles. So there's lots to go out. It's very nuanced and very complex, but this is a start. And I think this last bullet point means it may not be us or me that finishes this. So do everything as openly as possible so that if we all get consumed with other projects or lose interest or whatever, everything's out in the open so somebody can pick up and move with it. One of the tenets of open data that I think would help keep things along, open data and open source. So that's where we are. Thank you all for participating tonight and contributing to the data set and for listening to us gab and show some of our products. I really appreciate your time and thanks for your interest tonight.
Thanks in particular to Lala and Caitlin, who helped share resources throughout the course of the conversation with people who had asked questions. I'm really grateful for you. And if you've got connections to people who might be interested in this, please feel free to reach out to me. I dropped my email. We'd be happy to partner with people who are interested in this kind of stuff. The data is free, the code and stuff is all out there. So this can now belong to the community. Thank you guys again so much for giving us an hour and a half of your time. And we'll talk to you next year or offline.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your